Hello and welcome to another episode of the Transfer Show here on Anfield Index. I'm Trev Downey, podcasting to you from my home here in beautiful rural Ireland. I'm joined, of course, by our transfer guru, Mr. Dave Davis. How are you, sir?
All right. There's worse things in the world, don't get me wrong, but probably a bit like you. I think we discussed it before we went live. There's almost transfer fatigue with certain sagas or what's becoming a saga just setting in. And probably for the many who are watching, we are the same as you. Like, will someone just get on with what we want them to get on with, basically?
I've realised I'm not a fan of sagas. That's what I've realised. It's taken me some time to realise it, but I really don't like it. I don't have the patience for it. And I love when we go and hit hard and hit quick and get a job done. But you know what? We've persevered with a couple of sagas this summer so far, and it's been worthwhile. We'll see whether the big one that's currently on everyone's mind pans out. Some wrinkles today, Dave. Some wrinkles today, my friend, which have definitely thrown a few spanners in the work. But we'll start with Liverpool news as we always do. And as we know, if we are to fund some of these big signings that we still need to make in the centre half department, and theoretically, at least up top, someone will have to go. People will still have to leave. We'll go and probably finish the show with the biggest of our exit stories, but let's start with some of the smaller ones and the confirmation of Tyler Morton's departure, his medical, his signing. All of this, I think, is pretty much done. There's some interesting details about the sell-on clause, about the fee that I know you have for us. I think I read something via Paul Joyce today that confirmed some of those details as well. But it's not just Tyler Morton. There's also Ben Doak, who showed well, I thought, last night and did himself no harm whatsoever. Whether it's enough to keep him around Anfield or not is another thing. And then there's McConnell, who we were told was one that was certainly a preferred option for Arne Slot to keep around. So a loan more likely there. And then there's Jaden Dan. So let's walk ourselves through all of those with the big story first, that being Tyler Morton, who's coming in for, or who's heading off for some decent money for the Reds.
Totally. It feels like, and we kind of saw this a little bit last night, there's a golden boy pairing for us, isn't it? It's Rio and Gamoa and Trey Ione. Those are the two starlets, the one that obviously that Arne Slot's going to work with. But in a shame, in a sense, but it was always coming. Tyler Morton, I mean, it could even be announced as we hear right now, couldn't we? We're just waiting for that announcement that Tyler Morton's completed that move to Lyon for up to £15 million. And as you said, that 20% sell-on clause, which isn't a shabby deal for a player that, you know, really didn't play a single minute, hardly did he, last season. So, yeah, a smart move, a good move for the player that way as well. So that is one set to be confirmed out the door. You're right, Ben Doak, I mean, he scored last night. I don't really think he did himself any harm, but maybe didn't do himself any harm in the shop window. We chatted about it with David Lynch earlier. Still major interest. Wolves, West Ham, quite a few teams have inquired. It's just about, are those teams going to put up the money that Liverpool are looking for, at least 20 million quid? And you'd probably suspect it's one of those where they do a deal for somewhere just a little bit north of 20 million, sell-on clause, again in there, that type of thing. We'll get it done. But I like Ben Doak. It's just hard to see a future, isn't it, at Anfield, realistically, in that regard. So we're awaiting developments on that. McConnell, like you said, just waiting for him to sign a new deal and ship on, realistically, on loan, like the standard loan operations that Liverpool do. Jaden Dan's expected to go out on loan as well. It does feel like we've had their Anfield friendlies, and it always tends to be a marker in the transfer window for the kids, doesn't it? Are they young starlets? Have they got a real chance? If not, off they depart on loan or they stay with the first team squad. And there's nothing wrong with saying this. Rio and Trey are just an unbelievable potential level, aren't they? They really are. They are a bit head and shoulders above the rest. There's nothing wrong with saying that. It's right to be excited about those two players. The rest, a low move, departures, whether it's permanent or not, just seems right for them all. So even if this goes late in a window, I think we'll see a raft of them just departing one by one.
Can I ask you, seeing as it is just the evening after, what you made of the youngsters who did have a showing yesterday evening? Because an awful lot of people will be thinking of Rio and Gamoa. People will be thinking about Trinioni, particularly those two, and asking themselves questions about whether it's the right thing to do to keep them around the squad. Now, I heard you talk to David Lynch earlier on about Rio in particular, and the idea that, it seems to be that there is a path for him there to first team involvement. And perhaps occasionally we shouldn't be scared of promoting someone so young so quickly when they appear to be so talented. But, we have Ben Doak put in some very interesting preseason performances in previous years. What's your take on Rio and Trey and the best way to manage them? Do they seem to you, lads, who should be on the fringe of the first team squad for the majority of the season?
Yeah, it's trying not to blow our own trumpet a little bit, but how many times earlier, sort of towards the summer or early this summer, have we said the plan was always, for we understood it, they had massive hopes for Rio and Gamoa, and they didn't want to sort of block that pathway, as we said. And funnily enough, what's the terminology everyone's using? Rio and Gamoa's pathway right now. It was always something they looked at. I do think, being honest, there's a couple of things to this. It's pre-season, so you can never get too excited, of course. But pre-season, I think he's doing better than a lot of people, maybe even the Liverpool staff expected, and just almost, hold on, how many minutes are we giving this kid? Where do we see him? Like, can we put 16 here? All those types of discussions going on. But do you know what? It's better to have this discussions about holding him back a little bit, isn't it, than trying to develop something that's not really there. So that's a massive positive that way. Trey is, I feel for Trey Downey because I think he is such a talented youngster, but he's in just such a competitive area. That double pivot in midfield. I mean, look at the options we've got, like Szoboszlai, McAllister, Gravenberch, Curtis Jones as the squad rotational option. You've now got, I know not in the double pivot, but Florian Wirtz is an option there. Harvey Elliott, for God's sake, is moving on just because he's not, going to get a chance all those minutes. It's just a bit unfortunate where Trey Downey finds himself. I do think he will be around the first team picture and limited less minutes than Rio and Gamoa. But the word that we got, and we mentioned it last week, just because of how good they've become, I think those two are unloanable, aren't they? They're unloanable. You've got to control their development. Arne Slot's got to be having full handle on it. And it's really hard to say, but those two right now have got superstar potential. So we should be excited about them.
I think so. And an awful lot of people are reluctant to see Kevin there in the chat, reluctant to completely wipe our hands or wash our hands of Doak as well. So it is a very, very nice headache to have for Arne Slot, to be thinking about what to do with all these talented youngsters and how to best manage them. That's exactly the place that we'd like us to be in. Yeah. And the only other one that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, because there's been contrasting stories that I've heard, is Jayden Danns. We know that he picked up a bit of a knock, and we know that there was complications around that. Where are we with Jayden Danns in terms of what you're hearing from people about his status at the club? Because you quite often, via your various sources, you'll get a sort of a sideways reference as to how someone is perceived at the club. And I think he was very highly thought of by the Klopp regime. I'm wondering if it's the same with Arne.
Doesn't seem to be that way, to be honest. And again, if you think of the talent we've got in that area of the pitch and who might to be, to come in, to get in Liverpool's forward line, it's just insane now, isn't it, to even be an option? It really is, in the best possible way, such a high standard. I think it was telling that they were trying to, they loaned him to Sunderland, didn't they? But just injury problems made that a bit of a nightmare where he didn't play at all and came back. All the expectation is, again, Jayden Danns does a loan to maybe a top-level championship club, see how he does. But, and again, there will be some Jayden Danns fans, and they've seen his goals and, bits of Carabao, FA Cup and all that. A lot of the noise that we're hearing is the expectation is it's hard to see a future long-term at Anfield. That doesn't mean he's a bad player. But, I mean, just look at the forward line that you've got. Salah, you've just bought Hecke in for that money. You know, Gakpo on the left. Young Rio, the potential he's got to go in there. And, you know, who might be joining them as well at the same time. It's just Florian Wirtz even dovetailing possibly on the left, as people have mentioned. It's just unfortunate for Jadon Dans. The standard is so high. But in reality, we're quite happy with that at the same time, aren't we?
How could you not be happy with a situation like that? Let's address the elephant in the room, Dave, because we've kept people waiting long enough. They will want to get their Isak fix for what it's worth. And please, like we regularly say here, don't shoot the messenger. There's only certain amounts that we can wring from a comparatively dry story at this stage, but we'll try and get an angle or two for you here. And it's interesting, you know, I don't know how far you want to go into the Sesko thing because it is a story later on, but everything has this knock-on effect because we are, as you, I think, were the first to coin the idea of the term of being in like a housing chain. That's where we're at. And unless Newcastle get their shit together, realistically speaking, they're going to hang on to their asset. And they just don't seem to be able to do that. Now, there was talk last night about Isak's agent. I heard David Lynch shoot that down fairly dramatically and claim it was somebody else. And we've got now Eddie Howe, my favorite part of the show yesterday, dude. I did Daily Red for Dave yesterday. My favorite part was it being able to quote those Eddie Howe lines about this is Newcastle, and you know, doing the tough guy, you know, the toddler on growth hormones acting tough. Come on, man. It's a bit late to be posturing, but look at him. He's having a go. He's trying to hold the line, and you know he's a disciplinarian and all that. Sure. It's a complicated situation. Is there anything by way of a different angle? Can you put to bed those agent chit chat? Do you want to talk about Eddie Howe's stance? I don't know if you want to get into the details of what Newcastle aren't doing, which is what it's making our job all the harder.
Yeah, I think I say it's what Newcastle aren't doing more than anything. And do you know what reminds me of this of? And I know you love a good movie reference, always a man of culture and everything. Do you remember there's that bit at the end of The Godfather 3 where Michael Corleone's daughter gets shot on the theatre steps and he like does that dramatic like pause where he's just breathless, and it's that iconic moment from Godfather 3. Almost that bit where he's like, that is almost how I feel about this whole Isak saga at the moment. And we were debating, are we putting it into a saga? But it is just because of who we need to get into bed with to make it happen, don't we? And we'll go, like you said, we'll go into a little bit with the Newcastle stuff. But I can't remember a transfer window where one club has been rejected so publicly by so many players, especially players in the same position. I mean, they've just, we know it's going to happen. We're hoping it's going to happen. We're pretty confident it's going to happen. But like any bad nightclub, it's one in, one out to happen, isn't it? And they just can't seem to get one player in. Maybe, just maybe, despite all the protestations, we are Newcastle United and all this, maybe Newcastle United should just think about targeting players that they've actually checked if they want to play for them and they've actually done some groundwork on, rather than appointing your nephew last minute and then just trying to see, do you want to play for us? Do you want that, like, and getting rejected left, right, and centre. It is just honestly amateur hour across the board. And unfortunately, despite how well run we are, and we've proven that all summer, there's zero doubt about that, we are in a housing chain with amateurs. And unfortunately, it's got that knock-on effect. And until Newcastle actually do some business, and it looks like we're going to have to wait even longer, so get ready for the Premier League update at the same time, we're kind of just in stasis, aren't we? We're ringing the solicitor every day going, any developments, any surveys done, anything coming up, that, and just waiting and waiting and waiting. But this is maybe a lesson. What happens when you get into bed with amateurs?
There's so many places I could take that last statement, but I'm going to leave it right there, hanging awkwardly in the air. See it? You see it right there? Hanging awkwardly. You know what happens? You know what happens immediately after that silent thing that you just did the impression of? A really horrible howl, and I hope that's not Liverpool fans in the wake of this saga, as we've deemed it. An interesting question from Kevin, and it came to my mind today when I was doing Daily Red, and yesterday actually. What happens if this doesn't work out? And Kevin says, I'll just pop it up on the screen there. What happens if we can't get Isak? Where do we pivot next? We can't go into the new season with just Hecke as our only 9. It's an interesting point because the cover for that area was Luis Diaz, and he is now AWOL as well. So it is very interesting. And obviously we've got the tragic loss of our beloved Diogo as well. So it does really seem as if there's a glaring gap there, and we would need to pivot. For all the talk of Isak, I've heard very little talk about Liverpool having a sort of a secondary go-to option. Hecke used to be that for us, you remember? But now it doesn't seem like anyone who's talking about these pivot options, they're more sort of manifesting ideas that they've had themselves than echoing anything that even relates to a scintilla of a story from anywhere. That's my take. Have you heard anything by way of what might be a reasonable pivot for Liverpool?
No, to be honest. And everyone is now just a little bit starting to speculate that what happens if this doesn't actually go through and Newcastle just completely balls up the transfer window so it has the knock-on impact on us. I mean, obviously, as we've said, we don't think you're there yet. We all got the expectation, but you start thinking of names, and Rodrigo's been pretty much ruled out by many, hasn't he? Because of the fee, the wages, almost like guess who knocked that tile down. Yes, there's been mention of young Fofana, but that's more as almost a fifth forward option, isn't it? Look like a young Rio having a few of those FSG signing type players around to come in, not as a starter realistically or wanting to play serious minutes. The Julian Alvarez link died a long time ago, much to our dismay, didn't it, realistically as well? So you are just a little bit like, it's still a minor percentage, just to be clear to everyone. But the longer and longer this rumbles, if, for instance, we're at the season opener against Bournemouth and Newcastle haven't got a striker replacement in, which we can kind of laugh about, really, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility with how much of a mess they're making of this window, then you will just have a serious question around what are we going to do here a little bit. But really important to say at the same time, I think we're about 2-3 weeks away before we really start to think like what's going on. But you just couldn't put anything past Newcastle right now, could you? Nothing at all.
If we did have to go with the current incumbents, there is a scenario, I suppose, where Cody Gakpo could cheat inside, right? That could be a thing. It wouldn't be to everyone's taste, but I guess it would be a way of moving forward. Anyway, they will work it out. Their brains are very much trained on this task. We'll move on to our next story, and we'll kind of come back obliquely to the Isak thing when we focus on Newcastle and their absolutely lamentable efforts to sign people in a little while when we talk about the Premier League. But let's stay with Liverpool. I think we're all in absolute agreement that with the latest knock to Joe Gomez and just seeing what a defense looks like when Virgil's sick, we need action in this area. Last week, you flagged up De Winter, Van Hecke. I've seen mention of Koulierakis. We just mentioned earlier on that Newcastle are also in for Guehi, who we've been linked with very strongly. And there was at least one other Italian lad who Dave Hendrick was mentioning, and I've seen a little compilation videos of him floating about as well. You might want to mention him too. You've got a few other little angles. I'm going to leave that to you to wrap up. But talk to us about the centre half department. What's real, what isn't, what's fanciful, what's speculation, if there are any genuine links that you can stand up for us.
Yeah, the Mark Guehi one, it was such a hot file a while ago, wasn't it? And then just went like ice cold. And Ed Aarons, who gets a lot of Crystal Palace info, tweeted there today earlier that Crystal Palace yet to receive offers for him. And there's some crucial detail there, isn't there? Liverpool still thought to be his preferred option, but Newcastle could revive interest. Palace won 40 million quid. We said this last week. Liverpool seemed almost determined with Mark Guehi. The numbers got to start with a 3. And I think we're both of the opinion, like 40 million in the current market with a dearth of centre-halves for Mark Guehi, who's English, so you help your homegrown quota as well. And his experience just seems a great deal because you're buying straight away a player who's worth more on your books, aren't you? And who, I think he's a lesser player, don't get me wrong, but can cover and potentially challenge Ibu there for the centre-half spot. It's almost like, that meme we like with the stick, like, go on, do something. You're almost prodding Edwards and Hughes to do this a little bit. I think everyone would have a massive boost if Mark Guehi walked through the door quite quickly, and we'd all be like, great, that's a problem area we think sorted. Because that game last night, Trev, Konate was the only senior centre-half playing. Yes, VVD's ill and should return for the Community Shield, so it's nothing too much. But as you said, Joe Gomez, there's nothing really after that, is there, bar Endo and others move in position essentially at the same time. It does just really surprise me on this. Now, you mentioned a few names there. De Winter and Van Hecke, chase this up a bit more. De Winter's agent's been into the UK, flown into Liverpool a couple of weeks ago, so I don't know if that just hasn't progressed or nothing's really gone with that, but his agent specifically has been to Liverpool, flown in. So Adam P and Justin Bieber, brother, or whatever he's called, start doing your homework on that, please, to produce some results. I'll set you some tasks there. And Van Hecke. The only thing about Van Hecke is he is liked by Slot. He's got 2 years on his deal. He's told Brighton he's not signing a new one. So what are Brighton doing? Understandably, shipping him everywhere, aren't they? I know his agents talk with Newcastle, Spurs, and other sides as well. I have no doubt, don't get me wrong, he would prefer to come to us, and we wouldn't mind that deal going through. But suggestions are the price tag's about 43 million quid. Brighton are wanting a bit of a bidding war, aren't they? And others getting involved. And you're dealing with Tony Bloom and Paul Barber, ruthless operators at the same time. So all those ingredients don't really help the mix. Another one they've also looked at, you mentioned Koulierakis. They've had a look at him, spoke to his agent. I've never heard of this boy, a bit like I never heard of Coney de Winter. He could have walked past me in the street. There's a young French centre-half called Hecke. Not a clue, Trev. Could join us in the studio right now, and I generally wouldn't know who he is. Plays for Rennes, apparently. 20 years old, pretty decent in the air, not a bad passer. So he's another one they're looking at. As you mentioned, Leone, the Parma young centre-half, but seems to want to stay in Italy as, let's be honest, the inklings we're getting from that is Italians don't do well outside of Italy, do they? Especially not in the Premier League, as we know. So there seems to be a bit like we saw with other positions, which is promising, a lot of looking, a lot of things going on. But I think we just all like the trigger pulled a little bit on a centre-half quite soon, isn't it? I know people would want two at the same time as well, because there's only actually officially Ibu who's fit right now. Yes, VVD's got an illness and back soon, but if one of our senior centre-halves gets a knock, someone is playing out of position in the season opener, aren't they? Because Joe Gomez doesn't look like being back. And I like Joe Gomez. He seems a great guy. Everyone likes him. But I think if you get 20 games a season out of Joe Gomez this year, you're probably thinking we've done all right there, aren't we? In all honesty. So we need a centre-half in for me, almost more than all the Isak talk. And there's lots of shopping around like we did for many others earlier in the window. Maybe it might be after the Community Shield for Guehi and, of course, that Palace game on Sunday, who knows? But you would like one in before the season opener, wouldn't you, in all honesty?
You would, and I was saying again on one of the shows either yesterday or today that I found it very, I found quite jarring. When I said I put out some harmless tweet about, you know that is it what's his name? Ant-Man, Paul, what's his name? Paul Rudd. Do you know that do you
Yeah,
know that GIF? Look at us, you know that look at us, who'd have thought it, that GIF. I did that and it was just something along the lines of this is gonna be Dickie Hughes and Mick Edwards when we get Isak and Guehi in before the end of the window. And I got a lot of pushback about Mark Guehi, and people were saying don't really want him at the club. And I honestly didn't know what the story was about, and I just accepted people. People were telling me he didn't wear the armband. I've looked it up since. So Mark Guehi is a very religious guy and
yeah,
a devout Christian, and he wrote "I love Jesus" on the rainbow armband, which he did wear, and he wrote "Jesus loves you" on the rainbow armband with a smiley face, which he did wear. So I don't know that that's as abhorrent as people were making out.
no.
It's not like this horrible act of desecration. I don't think. Um, anyway, look, it's odd waters to be wading into, but I just wanted to set the record straight because I don't like agreeing with things that are wrong, and I just bowed to people's superior knowledge on a topic I didn't know about. It turns out they were wrong. Um, our next story is Harvey Elliott. And Harvey Elliott, a bit like Darwin and a bit like some of the ones that have gone already, was already being linked with an exit before the season ended. It hasn't gotten any more likely that he's going to hang around despite an interesting showing and a goal yesterday. He, as you said, and I heard you acknowledge this on at least one of the shows earlier on, went to each of the stands. Now,
Yeah,
that's a quite a deliberate thing in a kind of nothing friendly before the game, before the season. I think it's clear that he probably feels he's on his way out. West Ham had been the big link, but now since then, Spurs, in the wake of an injury to one of their more creative players, has been linked heavily. And we know that there's the Red Bull connection. And I wonder, is Klopp all working behind the scenes there in some way, shape, or form? Talk to us about Harvey Elliott and what the stories are about a potential exit for him, because Harvey's one of those, and it is a cynical way of looking at it. And if you love Harvey Elliott, congratulations, take a ticket behind me. We all love Harvey Elliott, but the
yeah.
likelihood is he's leaving. And if he's leaving, then we have to talk about the fee that we might get for him. What is that fee reported to be? And am I right in saying that Spurs and Red Bull Leipzig are the two most recently linked clubs?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of mentioned Spurs last week as a potential option, and their needs just accelerated big time, hasn't it? Because Son, as everyone knows, is set to depart the Premier League to move to Los Angeles, and James Maddison had what looked like a pretty serious injury, didn't he? He was on crutches. It was the same knee. He's re-injured as well there. So yeah, there's months, as Thomas Frank indicated there, that he's expected out. So in all honesty, it would be a great move for all parties, wouldn't it? Harvey Elliott, that type of club. Spurs again. People would look and say, well, the way Thomas Frank plays football, but I just think it would be a great move there, and their needs obvious. It could be good business for all parties. Red Bull Leipzig as well, like you mentioned, very interested in the player, and odds are that's set to be buoyed very shortly by serious funds from Benjamin Šeško and his sale, and also Xavi Simons. But again, you don't fancy they'll be as high a payers as the suggestion as Spurs, would they? And, a Premier League club, they always look for frugal deals, as it were, the Red Bull chain. But again, it would be great move, on all parties. The one thing it's just worth mentioning is that one of my mates went to the game and he's actually sat, by the dugout entrance as they come out. And he said, like, Harvey did that and all. And he said it was quite clear as a lot of people clocked when Harvey hits the tunnel, there was like a little tear or two down his eye, that he was quite emotional. So I think we all know where this one is going. But listen, anywhere north of 40 million for Harvey Elliott, I know some people will say, 50 and more, but maybe just that Euro under 21 final moment has been and gone a little bit, hasn't it? People will also look at Liverpool and say, well, why am I going to pay top dollar? Because they're stacked with so many attacking options, and Florian Wirtz is there at the same time. We know he's not going to play that much. So fee-wise, I think anything north of 40 million, Liverpool will entertain.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been times over the course of that kid's career where, if you were to say that 40 million and in and around that amount of money would be available for him, people would have bit your hand off. Let's be honest. And I really want him to go and make a career for himself elsewhere. And this is the thing. Again, I was listening to someone recently on a show. You realize that it's not like he didn't live his dream at Liverpool. He
Yeah.
played so many games. He was a beloved Klopp favourite in an exciting era. He was around the lifting of so many trophies and contributed to many of them. So it's not that much of a sad story. The main thing about Harvey is he loves the club so much that it's hard to see him being semi-forced out because he's not in favour. That's the only thing about it. Now, I have to ask you something. I've seen the name for ages. I've heard the name for quite a while, a few seasons now. And every time I've seen it, it's Benjamin Sesko. Lately, people are talking about Sheshko or Seshko or Sheshko. I have no idea what's going on. People are starting to annoy the shit out of me with this. Have you heard any? I will rely on someone who is, of the region, or when I hear the lad himself interviewed and he says his name. But until then, I'm going with Sesko unless you can contradict me. And it's interesting because that's where we go next. We go to the wider Premier League, and why not start with the mess that is Newcastle United? You and I have speculated as to why it is that they just can't get any deals over the line. What is it now? 8, 9 that have just gone completely by the board. And the Sesko deal looks like being the latest one of those and the most high-profile one probably to date. What is happening here? My take is that they probably need a more high-profile manager, because I'm assuming they're promising big money in wages. Is there anything looking likely? Is there at least an Ollie Watkins that they can go to? Because we know Watkins wants some kind of a move. Is Vissa any closer being done? Or any of the other names like Muniz or Strand Larson, or any of them a little bit closer? Because unless they get at least two of those lesser names, or Sesko plus one, I just don't see Isak happening.
It's just typical of their summer how many rejections they've had across the board. And then last night they're buzzing, aren't they? Because they've been in talks all day with Red Bull and Sesko's representative. And Sesko's rep's doing a John Obi Mikel, isn't he? When he's agreeing a deal with anyone and getting run away, ready to run away into the forests of Norway till he can get a deal signed and all that type of thing. It's just absolutely mental. And then United finally come in. I mean, this is how bad it is for Newcastle. They're getting blown out the water by a club that doesn't actually have the money fully right now, or hasn't lined up their books. United, if they get Sesko, are going to have to make sales to make it all meet, and they're still getting beat by them on a lower offer at the same time. I mean, it's just absolutely mental. Doing a bit of digging on this today, Sesko's, all the indications are from Bundesliga journalists, Sesko prefers Manchester United. And people will say, I know this is going to come in the chat as you do, why would you go to United? Like, look at when on all this, blah, blah, blah. United's wage offer, Trev, is more than 100 grand a week more to Sesko.
So that's why.
Sometimes things are as simple and as complicated as that at the same time. I mean, yes, there's legacy club and all that, and I get it. People will argue that, but yeah, it just is what it is realistically there. And like you said, we've seen reports that Ollie Watkins is the next break glass in case of emergency to do that. We've seen Ramos, haven't we, for PSG as another option to do there. Vissa, he's gone back to Brentford saying, I'm not going to train. I want this deal to get done. But that seems to just be frozen at the same time as well. I think this is proof of what happens on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of us, where we've done months of work. We've got experts in charge. We've done analysis, scouting, spoke to the players, lined it all up for the summer meticulously, as opposed to Sacking the guy who's done that work, putting your nephew in charge, picking players that you like the look of, not actually checking if they want to come to you properly in the first place as well. The strategies couldn't just be more opposite. And I know we're going to be joined any minute by raging Newcastle fans, but if you are a Newcastle, you've got to admit there's an embarrassment there. You're set to be turned down by your 7th forward publicly. And normally we'd probably kind of, we'd have a laugh, we'd giggle like we've done with others at certain points. That's not trying to be disrespectful to Newcastle. We're just talking factually what's happened. The biggest annoyance is, going back to the first section, we are in a chain with these people, aren't we? Everyone knows who we want. Everyone knows what we want. And we've no way of getting around it until they sort their home scenario out. And I'm probably beyond words with this. I think I'm just back to a kind of type of scenario. That's honestly where I am with it.
Hey, listen, we've moved on from the Roy Hodgson reaction, which is good. It's all about evolution. Can I just make a mention at this stage as well, lads flying into the chat rooms, lads and ladies, and fair play yesterday. I joined for 10 minutes when I could, and you were working with your lovely new toy with the lineups. I dropped into the chat room and some lunatic came into it, and the lads and lassies encircled said lunatic and sent him on his merry way. It was lovely to watch. We have a great community. God bless you all. And now watch as a lunatic jumps in. But anyway, that's the joy, isn't it, of an open-ended thing like this. Anyone can join. Let's move on to our next story. Having dealt with the mess that is Newcastle, and see if Spurs are any less messy. We know their talismanic forward son is heading off to the sunshine in Los Angeles, and Maddison, as mentioned earlier on, has a bad old knock. That's the Harvey Elliott link there, I think, for an awful lot of people looking at someone who could open a door or two with their passing and their movement. Yeah. But it's not just those two, that player alone. It's also a couple of others that they've potentially got interest in, including a lad for whom things didn't maybe go as well as he'd hoped when he made his big move to Bayern.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's starting to take a bit of shape under Thomas Frank. That had a mini bit of sadness for this for me, because Son's always been one of those Premier League players, hasn't he, that you've always probably admired from afar. Could have maybe been at Liverpool one day, but hey-ho, it wasn't to be. And it's the right time because his legs have gone. A nice move to the MLS with a bucket full of cash at the same time. Like you said, Maddison, a bad injury, so they're looking at attacking midfielders. Harvey Elliott does seem to be a serious option for them. But another one they're looking at who can play there is Moani. I think he's PSG officially, was on loan at Juventus. So he's one that they're having a good look at the same time. And if you think of Thomas Frank and teams at Brentford, he's always played quite physical midfield as well, hasn't he? Like Norgard, people who can really mix it a little bit behind. And I think they're quite happy they've got Palhinha. Do you remember the former Fulham boy who went on loan to Bayern Munich? They've taken him on loan for the season. I know all the noises from Spurs journalists. Thomas Frank is very happy with a signing like that at the same time. And to be fair, if you are going to get the best of Harvey Elliott, having someone like a Palhinha and a Bissouma or something like that, destroyers behind him in that type of formation, could just be perfectly suited in that regard. But they are trying to make a few moves now. Thomas Frank is trying to shape his squad a little bit, knowing full well they've got a Champions League campaign to deal with. And with Maddison looking pretty bad, and we're putting months on this, if not the season, they're going to start to make even more moves very shortly.
I've never known what to make of Spurs. I go back a long, long way to when Glenn Hoddle used to play for them, and I really admired Hoddle as a footballer. And they had Chris Waddle, and before that they had people like Steve Archibald. It was just a little bit before my time. But they were always a kind of an attractive club that was in the big five, as it was back then. But of late, it just seems to be a place where good managers go to die, and it's just a shame to see. I really hope in a way that Thomas Frank manages to do something, because he seems like such a good lad. You would be sort of eager to see a bit of success for him, of course, not at the expense in any way, shape or form of our club. So let's see if Harvey ends up there. Chelsea, of course, we got to go to Chelsea and Sweeney Todd's and bits and bobs going on. Of course, they have so many players that there's always a constant outflow from Chelsea, but it never ever seems to catch up, Dave, with the influx. Lots of big names in and around Chelsea at the moment, whether they're names that, you know, we'd want to necessarily be linked with, I'm not sure, with the exception, in fact, of any of these names, with the exception of Hato, I don't think we would. But do walk us through the business as it starts to ramp up a little bit for Chelsea.
Ambitious as ever, Chelsea, to have about 86,000 attacking midfielders and wingers on their books, aren't they? So what you said, we know Hato's come through the door there. And the two serious targets they're really looking at the moment, and many expect to get done, are Xavi Simons, who we know at Red Bull Leipzig, and Garnacho for Manchester United as well. Those are the two they are seriously wanting through the door. But Chelsea, for once, are seeming quite sensible and trying to balance the books. Dewsbury Hall, he's taken his stately home down to the Merseyside area, hasn't he? He's an Everton player, or set to be confirmed if it's not already. As is on the screen, Nicholas Jackson is likely to leave. They're looking at suitors, which isn't really a surprise because he gets sent off pretty much every game he plays at the moment as well. A couple of players to Burnley as well. Broja, Ugachukwu, they're set to complete permanent deals there, so that's even more cash going out the door there. I think it's Guehi, it's pronounced, the young lad they signed from Barcelona. He's set to go on loan to Sunderland if that's not been completed already. So they are really, they've left it a bit later than everyone expected. And maybe it's just because of the Club World Cup and everything that happened. You can't forget, they got João Pedro through the door, didn't they, earlier in the summer as well. But Chelsea are still wanting to make a few moves, as we said. They've just got to ship the 8,000 unwanted supporting cast out the door and get that all sorted as well.
Yeah. Dewsbury Hall at the Hill Dickinson. Okay. Last story then is sort of looking around the rest of the clubs. It's all going to be a little bit of an anticlimax after the usual lunatic asylum update that is Chelsea. But City have been interesting. They went in early and did big business and got bits done very early. The most interesting one of all is the Tyler Dibling stuff. I'm finding that very interesting because he's a lad that's so highly rated. I know several of our own podcasters, no one less than Dave Hendrick is mad about Dibling as a potential player for the future. But there are also bits and pieces around Leeds and Villa as well. Talk us through the rest of the Premier League business as it currently stands.
Yeah, you're right. It's just a proper mishmash of stuff, this, isn't it? I mean, City, people forget, they went huge in January. They went huge in the summer as well. A few of those didn't really work out. I mean, that young Vitor Rice who came from Brazil and Palmeiras, nothing's really, he doesn't look ready at all for the Premier League, does he? So what are they doing? They're using the multi-club model. So he's expected to be shipped off to Girona any day now to, play on loan there. And there's a few others, maybe O'Reilly's even been suggested if they get Livramento, who they're still going for. As you said, this one's just weird, isn't it? Tyler Dibling could end up at Everton, of all clubs, under the Moisaya. And, they've had a bid rejected. They've come back. Southampton have made a counter offer, haven't they? Sort of around 50 million, that type of thing, which, I mean, do you remember at the start of the summer, it was a lunatic suggestion, but Southampton were looking for 100 million or whatever it was. I think it's probably fascinating as to maybe where his stock is. And, we're not trying to make enemies here, but the fact that Everton of all clubs are being linked with him as the strongest option maybe tells a little bit of a story of where he's fallen to. Other promoter clubs, we talked about Burnley making a few moves. Leeds are still trying to make moves, as we know as well. Looking to sign Bilal El-Khanousis, the young attacking midfielder at Leicester. They made a move for him. We'll see if that develops. And Villa, just doing some weird moves, because we talked about Ollie Watkins and might be happening. They've just about to sign a player, and I can't pretend I've heard of this player, but Evan Gessard, I think it's pronounced, from France, an attacker there. And do you remember Marcos Asensio, who they had on loan from PSG, trying to redo that deal as well, trying to get him back on loan, because it doesn't seem like there's many permanent suitors for him, which I think would be a decent deal for Villa at the same time. So, like you said, to bring it all together, just an absolute mishmash of stuff, but loads of things going on.
If Everton were to get Dewsbury Hall and the kid who I've just mentioned dibbling through the door, I don't think people should sleep on David Moyes getting them into some sort of respectability. I think it's very possible. He really did a super job at West Ham, and he's a highly regarded guy. He's easy for us to sneer at. Taft's Tavern, Man United spell. It's easy for us to sneer at David Moyes, but I would keep an eye on that. If he starts getting sort of solid citizens through the door, that's what he thrives with, is those sort of level of footballers and getting them to overachieve. Let's finish up the show by going around Europe, and we're going to finish with a story that brings us back to Liverpool, but we'll start with Douglas Luiz, who apparently, Dave, has not one, not two, not three, but 4 different Premier League clubs interested in him. One time, Liverpool were reported to be amongst those a couple of years ago. Not anymore, it seems. Who are these 4 clubs that are interested in Douglas Luiz?
Yeah, there does seem to be a great multitude. Spurs have been linked at one point. Forest is on the screen. They seem to be the strongest, really keen to get the player back as well. You never know genuinely, how much is in this, but he's not wanted at Juventus. He doesn't want to stay there at all. He's clearly got Premier League experience, was at City, wasn't he? Did so well at Villa. Arsenal tried to get him for big money at one stage as well. It just went disastrously wrong a little bit, didn't he, when he left Villa and went to Juventus. Everton, even one of the clubs as well, which you're right, you say he's sleeping on them. If they got Diblin, Douglas Luiz, and although, all the other players we mentioned through the door, it would be quite a unit, wouldn't it, at the same time? So we'll have to see. I think the big thing everyone's expecting is it might be some sort of loan deal with an option or a wage thing Juventus paying. What we'll have to see. But everyone is expecting Douglas Luiz to head back to the Premier League at some point.
Yeah, a much admired footballer, it has to be said. Dortmund are up next for us, and they are looking at the Premier League with big googly eyes on them, thinking they can do some business. What are the stories here around Dortmund?
They always raid the Premier League, don't they, for almost the bargain basement or damaged bird type signings, don't they? I think they can, get value of, and probably no surprise for many. He's part of Manchester United's bomb squad, but Jadon Sancho is still being looked at by Borussia Dortmund, who are obviously waiting till the end of the summer to absolutely do over United and offer like 10 grand a week plus a Karamak and a Twix in installments type of thing, aren't they? So they could just get that absolute bargain. We know how well Sancho does in the Bundesliga as well. As is on the screen, Fabio Silva, the Wolves boy, he's moved around a lot, but he's a target for them at the same time. Buonate, I think it's pronounced, the Brighton boy, the Argentinian, the winger, he's being linked with Dortmund at the same time. And even for Chelsea, Kenny Chukwuemeka, he's being looked at for a possible permanent move there as well after his loan. So they're quite savvy operators, Dortmund, in that regard, aren't they? They'll always look at where a bargain, shall we say, can be picked up from Premier League signings that didn't work out or clubs that are badly run. So it would be no surprise if a few of them ended up there.
Love that broken bird analogy. I just love the idea of Dortmund going, I can fix him. I can fix him. Right, let's get to our second last story. We mentioned Lookman on the last show. We also mentioned Chiesa, and it's interesting to bring it up now, like as we try to steer the ship back towards Liverpool for the end of the show. And Chiesa, last night had a bit of time on the pitch. It looked to me as if he was included in that second lineup not necessarily for his own, edification, but because maybe there's a scenario where he could be kept around as a senior type player who can come in and do bits. There's no doubting his talent. There is doubting the manager's fondness for using him. So that's going to be interesting. What have you heard in relation to how nailed on Chiesa is for away? Lynch earlier on didn't seem convinced. He seemed to think it was likely to happen, but didn't seem to be convinced about any particular destination. So talk to us about Lookman, Chiesa, and if there's any kind of interplay there between those two scenarios.
Yeah, with Lookman, clearly wants to go to Inter Milan. They made a bid. Lookman and his agent think it's a more than suitable bid, but Atalanta have turned it down, been quite public with that. So Lookman hands in a transfer request, and he's now just a no-show at trading, which is good. We've got another no-show in the mix after Victor Gyökeres went to Arsenal. So a bit of personal drama that way. As it says, many just expected Inter to make that improved bid, but Atalanta saying he can only sign for a top club outside of Italy. They're not prepared to sell him to an Italian club. So that all just gets messy. And the reason that gets messy is Federico Chiesa, for many Italian journalists have mentioned, was expected to be the likely replacement that, Atalanta had sought there. But this just looks messy now, doesn't it? As though it may never happen. And also, we know Chiesa's been available and his agent's been trying to sort that move, as we've mentioned, throughout the summer. The wages are the big issue, aren't they? Italian clubs are just not paying the wages that Federico Chiesa's on. So talk of loans with options were Liverpool subsidised, which Liverpool aren't keen to do, of course, thinking, there's still a player, as you mentioned there, at the same time. So it's just all a little bit messy, unfortunately, for Chiesa, who wants to go back to Italy, it's important to say, wants to play regularly there as well, because it's World Cup year. And Gattuso's been honest about it publicly, hasn't it? He needs to be playing if he wants to have that chance to be in the squad. So it's all got to happen. And yeah, from speaking to a few, as you mentioned, last night, people shouldn't really get almost a false impression of it. He was there more as a squad filler, unfortunately, because Hugo Ekitike was never going to play the 90 minutes at the same time. So, and I know people putting in the chat, he could be our fifth senior forward and all those types of things. No, it's just not, I'm not saying impossible, but that is not how Arne Slot sees it. That is not what we're hearing at all. That, we've talked about Rio and Gamora and his promotion. Who else Liverpool are looking at. I think it just needs to be sorted. As much as his tune is an absolute banger, I think it's going this summer.
Yeah, it seems to be the direction of travel. I am surprised at it. I'll tell you the main reason, Dave, is that I don't see us recouping any more than we spent. And I certainly don't see us recouping the wages that we spent for a year and the wages that, or the money that we spent on the transfer fee, if that's where people are looking to get a clear kind of, it cost us nothing type of situation. I can see where people are saying, like JP are saying, that maybe he might hang around as a senior forward. It seems to be a sort of semi-logical option, but if he's not in the manager's thoughts, then he's not in the manager's thoughts. And that's sadly, like with Harvey Elliott, very much where the reality seems to lie. So, well, as far as we could see so far. Our last story, Dave, and this is the one that really brings us back full circle properly to Liverpool. We've already touched on the club via Chiesa there in the last story, but this last story is about Al Hilal, who basically said, I'll see your paltry offer, AC Milan, and I'll back up this big truck full of gold on top of it. It's remarkable, the discrepancy between what is being reported to be on the table for Darwin Nunez at Al Hilal and what he would have been getting at a European club, AC Milan or Napoli or any of the other places that were supposed to be possibly slightly interested in him. That will basically be a real factor in this. My thing, and you know this, has always been that I could see this going right down to the last day of the season, because I can see Darwin Nunez. He's a good lad. He's a good footballer. It's not worked out at Liverpool. He therefore has no cachet in the Premier League, so he has fewer options than he should have. And I could see him, though, wanting to hang on for a European club and perhaps Champions League football, because I can see a fella at that age, he's a young man, from pride reasons, wanting to do that and not wanting to go to what could be seen as a kind of retirement home league, a secondary status league, whatever. But there is the lure of the money. There is the idea that maybe you go and you do a season or two and then you come out of it rehabilitated, your reputation enhanced, and you go to a European club then. And it would be easy to sell someone on that, Dave.
Yeah.
Where do you think things stand on the reality, the likelihood, the over-under on Nunez actually taking this Al Hilal offer, which we believe, don't we, is very real, even though it hasn't tabled yet? The interest is very real.
I actually think that the Napoli multiple failed approaches and that whole drama actually helps the chance of this, because Darwin, for whatever we say about him, just wants to be loved, doesn't he? Just wants to be, loved, have that arm around his shoulder. He's that type of player. There's nothing wrong with saying that. He will be hit and miss. He is a bit erratic. He's not going to get that from Arne Slot. We know his time at Liverpool's done. Darwin knows his time at Liverpool's done. I think a lot of people spotted this last night, wasn't it? There was applause from him, tapping the badge, all those types of things. Many thought it felt like a farewell. Now, as you mentioned, the two clubs being linked, Al Hilal, who we've had multiple reports from, people with the Saudi side saying, yeah, he's absolutely the one Simone Inzaghi wants and instructed them, as many have reported, to get this deal done. And they are speaking to Liverpool. As David Ornstein, Romano, everyone's commented on. There's zero doubts about that. And as it says, negotiations continuing, which is probably, by the way, how many trucks of money are arriving on Merseyside to your house to, transport your goods and that type of thing, no doubt. Now, people will talk about AC Milan and all that, but here's the big thing that's coming from the Italian side. AC Milan are not the affluent club they once were by any means. They're actually set to sign a midfielder, and I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong here. I think it's Jashiri, it's pronounced, the Swiss international. So that's pretty much their budget gone. They're looking for a loan, Trev, probably with, a forced obligation or maybe an option and that type of thing. But here's the biggest thing that's also coming into the mix. The wages they're offering are apparently not even half of what Al Hilal have stumped up. So I kind of just get the impression it will be, if all things being equal, zero doubt Darwin would want to go to AC Milan. Zero doubt about that. But when they're not going to meet Liverpool's price tag, when they're not going to do the wages, after the Napoli failed scenario as well, I just think this feels like the move. Bizarrely, if anything now, almost back to square one, the only thing that might hold it up is the whole Isak drama, isn't it? And everything involved in that chain, that Liverpool may just be reluctant to actually pull the trigger on this fully until that one is completely sorted. That's possible. And like you said, it wouldn't surprise me, even though it is not what we want at all, if all these things just roll into later parts of the window, which things still get done, but it's probably not ideal on what Arne Slot and Richard Hughes wanted, is it?
No, it's not. It is absolutely not. And I think it's quite frustrating, because it will have made what was such an impressive and neat window, if it ends up in a messy saga between Darwin, Willy won't he, Isak, Willy won't he. I think that is... it will be unfortunate. And imagine a world, and this world does exist, I'm not sure what the percentage amount is, Dave, but it exists, in which we get frustrated in our moves for Isak. And like you said, there is a reality that is posed to the club, which is, well, he doesn't want to go, whether they're offering a boatload of money or not. I guess we keep him. And that is like I said, that's not really a future that anyone wants to envisage, because I think most of us have kind of mentally severed ourselves from Darwin Nunez at this stage, even his biggest fans. So but it's on the table, I think, is what I'm saying. It's an interesting one. So many go.
You know, I love a line when we get it texted and different things. We've had stuff before with Tyler Morton's departure to Lyon, and based on last night, Arne Slot and his staff have spoken to Trey Ione to say you are staying, and essentially you are the next cover midfielder in that double pivot. So, you know, you've naturally got Mackers, Bosley, Gravenberch, Curtis Jones, that Trey Ione is there to get minutes. And also, that's been made clear to Wataru Endo at the same time as well. So I don't know if that will affect his decision. He seems, I mean, I did that interview, didn't he, the other week, where he's like, I'm happy to cover any position and play any position, which great attitude, happy to be here. But I just wonder, with it being made clear that Trey Ione is more likely to start in midfield ahead of him, what happens there?
Ooh, okay. Can you give us anything around where you're getting that info from, or that latest line from?
You know them. That's probably the best thing I can say. People will know them as well. People will know them from, various things. That's the best way I can say it.
Well, that's a very, very interesting way for us to end. And I'd like to thank again the thousands of you that are watching. It's always very heartening for myself and Dave. We had a little bet amongst ourselves as to whether you guys would show up tonight, thinking you might be transfer fatigued. But no, here you are in your big numbers again. We appreciate you very much. Thanks to everyone who got involved in the chats. And thanks most especially to Dave, who compiles all this information so we can do the show by speaking to all those people that he speaks to on a regular basis. If you saw our WhatsApp between me and him, you would understand the absolute mental nature of the stuff that comes in and the rate at which it comes in. So thanks to everyone for being part of it. Thanks to Dave for gathering the info. And we'll see you again soon.